Basically, what's happening is that introverts have nervous systems that react more intensely to stimulation. And so very often, the most unlikely people, including the hard-driving CEO and the hard-driving salesperson, they come up to me and tell me, well, I'm an introvert too, and I have acquired extroverted skills that allow me to do my job that I love, but this is who I really am.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
Well, we've got Susan Cain joining us this week on the Midlife Chrysalis, and I'm just honored that she's joining us because she's somebody who prefers her own company, and she's famous for her book Quiet, about solitude and introversion. She's also famous for her book Bittersweet, which is about longing and being open to feeling and seeing things in a more deep fashion than the superficial way so many of us live our lives. This is a great episode for those of you who feel a little bit like an ambivert. You're sometimes an introvert, you're sometimes an extrovert, and maybe as you're getting older, you're becoming a little bit more of an introvert. She gave me a little bit of advice, which was helpful. I think you're going to enjoy it. And it's a nice, quiet, more mellow one of our episodes. So I hope you enjoy it. Susan Cain, welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis.
Chip Conley, it is so awesome to be here.
Recently, I was with your community. Talk about that. Talk about the quiet community and the candlelight conversations you have on Sundays.
You were our guest at our Quiet Life community, which is a community of readers, basically, on Substack. It's a community specifically for people who, I would say, are tapped into a certain frequency of the kind of quiet, focusing on quiet, depth, beauty, and maybe a little bit of a touch of the bittersweet side of life. So I think of it as a community, almost a congregation of kindred spirits. And yeah, I write to our community twice a week, and the community writes back. We have really active conversations. And then, as you know, we come together once a month for candlelight chats where we invite guests like you. And as I was just telling you, you were one of our all-time favorite guests in the community. People just loved you. And I think there's probably something about you that shares the frequency that I just described in the Quiet Life.
And I'm looking forward to having this conversation because I'm a little perplexed by my move back to introversion. And so I want to explore that with you. But let's start with the fact that your career, your academic career, your corporate career as a lawyer, I mean, who would have guessed Susan Cain? Well, the English major from Princeton makes sense to me. But then Harvard Law School, and then corporate lawyer, and then a consultant helping people understand negotiations and train for negotiations. My gosh, as someone who is an introvert and quiet, that sounds like that might have been hard. Talk about that. Did you have your midlife chrysalis? You're around age 40 when you said, "Oh my God, what am I doing?"
Oh, it was probably earlier than that. It was around when I was 33 or so. I had it very early. But I mean, having said that, there are so many quiet, self-described introverts who are in all of these kinds of careers, these high-powered careers. And I know this because I now ironically have this kind of profession where I go around speaking to companies and organizations about this topic. And because I'm talking about it, people feel very comfortable to tell me who they really are. And so very often, the most unlikely people, including the hard-driving CEO and the hard-driving salesperson and that kind of thing, they come up to me and tell me, well, I'm an introvert too, and I have acquired extroverted skills that allow me to do my job that I love, but this is who I really am. So I don't think I was very unusual. I think the only thing that was unusual is that I talked about it openly and wrote a book about it. But inhabiting that world is not unusual at all.
The book, which came out in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, became a sensation. And this was your first book, is that correct?
Yeah, that was my first book.
To have a first book go so viral and what was that like? All of a sudden, someone who's writing about introversion and didn't mind just sort of having that space to be on your own, all of a sudden you were in the public eye and since then have been giving lots of speeches, the irony of all that. What was it like for your life?
It was a kind of like topsy-turvy, upside-down whirlwind that I want to say in some ways has never stopped, though in the last couple of years it really has shifted in ways that we can and should talk about because of your work in the world. But yeah, I mean, so on the one hand, it was like the most incredibly gratifying thing in the world for two reasons. One, I had wanted to be a writer since I was 4 years old. So after this huge detour with corporate law and negotiations and all the rest, I was finally doing what I had always wanted to do. And two, it was gratifying because so many people were telling me how life-changing it was for them. And that's really the most incredible feeling that you can possibly have with the work that you do. And that's a feeling that I still have every single day because I still get these letters every day. So yeah, on the one hand, it was like incredibly gratifying for those two reasons. And then on the other hand, yes, my life was suddenly turned upside down and I became a public speaker for the next, like ever since. Yeah. And so learning how to balance that it's been a process because I'm now at a point where I'm comfortable with public speaking. And I'm comfortable with doing interviews and all those kinds of things. Like I don't suffer from huge nerves beforehand the way I used to. But it's still the case that my favorite way to spend my day is to be with my family, be at a cafe, with my laptop writing and playing tennis and hiking, like all things that are not out there with crowds of people. And so I have had to be like incredibly intentional about my scheduling ever since this happened.
So let's explore this topic of introversion and I certainly want to tap into your wisdom on this. How do you define an introvert? And have you found that people over the course of their life are shifting from extrovert to introvert or back or ambivert? And then what is this new thing, the otrovert? Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, we can talk about that. That's separate. That was like 5 questions in one. So and even just the question of what is an introvert is something that we could talk about for like an hour, but I'll give you a more succinct definition. I still probably love best the definition that I'm sure you and many of your listeners have heard of it being a question of where do you get your energy? Because it is the case that introverts can be incredibly socially skilled. They can be full of love, usually for their closest friends, colleagues, family, and they get their energy more from less overtly stimulating situations. So they don't want to have like a ton of people around, a ton of stimuli, a ton of lights, a ton of noise. They want quieter, more mellow environments. And extroverts are the opposite. Extroverts get more energy from those kinds of more hyper-stimulating environments. And for extroverts, the liability is if you don't get enough stimuli coming at you, you start to feel kind of listless and sluggish and unhappy. And these are differences in our nervous systems that have been tracked. Basically, what's happening is that introverts have nervous systems that react more intensely to stimulation. And so for us, our nervous systems can get into overdrive very quickly. And for extroverts whose nervous systems respond less acutely, the liability is more if there isn't enough happening, then you feel understimulated. And these differences have been tracked in babies, in newborn babies. You can track, how much does a baby respond to sugar water? Like how much do they salivate in response to the sugar water? And salivating is a form of your nervous system reacting to a stimulus. So the babies who salivate more are the same ones who, when they grow up or when they're 2 years old and you put them in a play group of kids they've never seen before, the babies who salivated more are more likely to freeze up a little bit in a group of kids they've never seen because their nervous system is telling them this group it's a little too much. There are too many stimuli coming at once, so we're going to chill, we're going to pause, we're going to reflect, and only once we've settled back into equilibrium are we going to feel comfortable and join in. What I've just described is kind of inborn temperaments that we all have. And of course, those inborn temperaments then interact with thousands and thousands of daily experiences that we have and skills that we acquire. So our ultimate personality ends up becoming a lot more complex than that original temperament. But I think that original temperament tends to stay with us to some degree, always.
Now we're gonna unpack the Chip Conley story, and I get to tap into the wisdom of Susan Cain. So I was a pretty extreme introvert as a kid. I had imaginary friends. I liked to write. I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, similar to you. I did my best to be social because my father was extremely social, and I was Stephen Townsend Conley Jr., Chip off the old block. And then around age 12, my parents, especially my dad, said, "Listen, if you're not more social, we're gonna send you to therapy." And therapy sounded like prison. So I said, "Okay, I would." And during my adolescent years, I just went overboard and I learned how to become a social alchemist, a mixologist of people. And then I did that even better in college. And then, you know, next thing I knew, I was a hotelier and which is really about social alchemy and running bars and restaurants. And in the last few years, um, what's been apparent to me is how much I need private space just for myself. And I now on Sundays do my Sabbath day, which is I'm offline most of the day. I hike a lot. I meditate a lot. I write. I, maybe I'll be one-on-one with a friend or my partner. But long story short is I really need that day. Do you see that people in midlife are often sort of shifting from the external, that extroverted self, to the internal, the more introverted self? Or is there something else? Is that not the right language for what I've just described?
No, I think it's exactly the right language. We do see in studies that most people get more introverted as they get older. The interesting thing is that people tend to hold more or less to what you might call their rank order, by which I mean if somebody, like when they were in 6th grade, was the most extroverted kid in the class, that person is still probably going to be the most extroverted kid in the class when they show up at their 50-year reunion. But everybody will have shifted to have mellowed out a little bit since 6th grade. So it's completely natural what you're describing. And then, of course, the other thing that happens in midlife that I don't think is about introversion, extroversion per se, but it's about a kind of deepening and a letting go of ambition per se. In midlife, I think people start to feel freer to become who they really are. They start to feel fewer obligations to adhere to social norms, social obligations that they've been holding since they were young. Like in your case, it was very explicit, as it is for many introverts. I've heard that story from many, many introverts of their parents or teachers or whatever, like explicitly or implicitly giving them the message that you have to be someone other than who you actually are. And with midlife, there comes a kind of great letting go of that. So it's not surprising that you would be carving out more and more space like that. And it's interesting when I hear you talk about it, I'm like, "Huh, well, why are you stopping at Sunday? Why only Sunday?"
Well, partly because I teach a lot of workshops at MEA and I'm, the social alchemist again in those environments, but I also create boundaries for myself. For me, if leading a workshop during the day and the group is gonna have dinner at night and then they're gonna do campfire songs around the fire, like, okay, I'm gonna leave at dinner and I need this time to replenish, and it feels good actually. It does feel good. It surprises some people in my life who have always thought of me as Chip the extrovert, and maybe even take it personally when I now am not as motivated to say yes to opportunities to go out and have dinner with 10 friends, or I don't know. I mean, it's like actually going to a reunion sounds like the worst thing in the world. But I think that's probably maybe there may be some extroverts who agree with that as well. But I'm sure. What have you learned? I mean, in the 13 years since the book came out, what additional things have you learned about quiet and about introversion that you did not know a dozen years ago?
It sounds like you have a little bit of a case of what psychologists call reputational confusion, which is that you've developed this reputation over decades, it sounds like, for being
Yeah.
for being an extrovert and for being what you call a social alchemist. And so then that's what people expect from you. And when you deviate from that, people don't know what to make of it.
You say reputational conflict?
Reputational confusion.
Confusion. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think this is a term from the beloved personality psychologist Brian Little, whose work I talk about a lot in Quiet. He's great. And what I would suggest to you is to be open with people about the fact that you actually are deep down an introvert, and that as you're getting older, that's that you're leaning more into that side so that people don't take it personally. Like I can tell you in my situation, because this happens to be book and TED Talk and so on that I'm so known for, and the Substack, the Quiet Life Substack, all these things people associate with me. For that reason, I don't think people get offended when I turn down their dinner party invitations. And probably some of the invitations never come in the first place because they know, oh, she probably won't like that. And it makes things a lot easier. So you don't have to be as extreme a version of that as I am. Like, I'm thinking of this amazing guy I know, Doug Conant, who is the CEO of
Trader Joe's. No?
No, he was at Campbell Soup.
Oh, Campbell Soup. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, he's such a good guy. And he's a very shy and introverted person, he will tell you. Like when he was still a CEO, he would sit down and tell the people who were on his team everything about him. He called it the declare yourself exercise. And so some of what he was declaring about himself were his views on the industry and things like that. But some of it was, I'm an introvert, I'm kind of shy. So if it seems that I'm not celebrating with you after the big win, or, doing the office birthday party with you or whatever it is, please know that this is who I am and not to take it personally. And that goes such a long way.
If you're enjoying the conversations we've been having on the Midlife Chrysalis, I have a valuable offer for you to consider. My book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is a national bestseller. And right now, you can get a copy for just the cost of shipping. It offers stories, research, and practices to help you move from a midlife crisis to a midlife catalyst and see this stage of life not as a decline, but an opportunity to flourish. Claim your copy today at meawisdom.com/midlife book. I was going to ask you earlier, what happens when you get a big speaking engagement in Las Vegas? Do you always turn it down?
No.
You
I've
like
done
Las Vegas?
so many. No, I don't. But
Okay.
I've done so many speaking engagements there.
I know.
I mean, I kind of get a kick out of it, just anthropologically, it's like fascinating.
Weird as can be. Yeah. There's a term I recently coined called the Worktrovert. The Worktrovert is somebody who is actually may present as an extrovert, but uses work as a way to explain why they need space. And it's funny, we were doing a workshop recently at MEA here in Santa Fe, and someone was describing themselves, and I was like, "Oh, they're describing me." And it's not like they're a workaholic, because actually it's not that they feel addicted or a compulsion. They just use their work as an excuse for why they want their space. Does that make sense as well? I mean, is it, I don't know, maybe there's lots of different kinds of excuses for how do you say no to people. But I don't know. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense because what we're really talking about is how do you get to be yourself in a world where there's so many how do you get to be yourself as an introvert or quiet person in a world where there's so many social obligations and expectations to not be that way? Okay, well, one of the other social norms that we have these days in our culture and have for a long time is to honor getting work done. So, behold, that's like the perfect way to do it. Yeah, guys, I've got to get some work done. And I mean, this is something I experience all the time in my own life because as I told you, like I love sitting with my laptop in a cafe with my latte and writing and I love it for its own sake, but I also love it just because it's a kind of quiet ritual of solitude that I have every day with myself. And so even when we go on family vacation, you know, at first I thought, well, you're on vacation, you're supposed to just completely shut off, turn everything off. But I found that I ended up feeling deprived if I didn't have 2 or 3 hours a day of my ritual of solitude and writing and laptop time. And everybody understands it. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about bittersweet. So you reframed the idea in many ways of introversion and being quiet. You also reframed the idea of bittersweet, which was the idea of melancholy and beauty and feeling maybe two things at the same time. A little bit of longing attached to it. Can you talk a little bit more about the premise behind bittersweet and what led you to writing that book?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of bittersweet is that I believe there's a richer and deeper form of happiness that's available to us when instead of trying to be super cheerful and joyful all the time, no matter what, instead we have a kind of near constant understanding of how fragile life is and how much joy and sorrow life contains at every moment. It contains both of those things and everything in between. And to understand that is yeah, it's a deeper form of happiness with occasional bouts of ecstasy, I would say, thrown in. And the ecstatic part kind of answers your question of what made me start writing this book in the first place, because it started with a kind of random question, which is I was trying to figure out why I found minor key sad music to often be thrillingly uplifting as opposed to making me sad. And I'm not the only one. There's studies showing that people play the happy songs on their playlist. I forget the exact numbers, but let's say it's something like 75 times, and they play the sad songs more like 142 times. There's just something about being on that frequency that opens up kind of tidal waves of love. I think that's really what's happening. You hear music like that and you feel this tremendous gratitude to the musician for being able to transform some sort of form of suffering into something so beautiful and magnificent. And you feel connected to all the other people who are listening to it and have had those same experiences. So it's basically this profound moment of human connection. And that's one of the reasons that I think having a bittersweet outlook on life leads to this deeper form of happiness, because it's basically a constant form of connection and like understanding what it is to be human and feeling connected to every other human who also has that condition.
What practices do we need to have in order to balance this sense of ecstatic beauty and the depth of feeling around things good and bad, or not, I don't want to say good and bad, but sadness and joy with not falling into despair? What are the practices that a person needs to have to be able to experience bittersweetness without actually all of a sudden feel like, oh no,
Right.
I'm going down a hole.
Yeah, that's interesting that you use that phrase because that's how I often think of it. If I think if you're not doing the dance between joy and sorrow, I do think of it as kind of falling down a well. So one of the practices I would say is really tuning into beauty, which is all around us everywhere all the time. And we don't spend that much time paying attention to it. But it's like right outside your window. If you look at the trees outside, it's online. One of the things that I started doing was around during the 2020 pandemic era. I found myself really having a problem with doom scrolling. And so I started consciously following artists in my social media feeds until I suddenly had feeds that were just full of art. And then I would start every day by sharing a favorite piece of art on my social media with my community. And that just became this daily practice of really focusing on art that I found beautiful. And I still do that in a way, like with my Quiet Life Substack. Every time I send out a letter, which is twice a week to the community, I'm always showcasing the work of an artist I love who people probably don't know with every single communication. Like it's just really important to me to embed everything with beauty. So that's one answer to your question. And also just like tuning into what happens to give you personally joy. Like I love playing tennis. Every time I play tennis, it gives me what I call tennis joy, and it lasts for about 5 or 6 hours after every time I play. So I try to play as much as I can.
You just were playing tennis, right?
I was this
So we're
morning.
catching
Yeah.
you in
Yeah,
your
so I'm
tennis
still in
time.
tennis joy. Yeah. And then at the same time, like another practice, maybe sort of on the other side of the fence, is what the Stoics call memento mori, which means to remember death, remember mortality. And people think of that as a kind of weird or morbid practice, but, and I know you know this, it's so much the opposite. I started doing this practice when my children were quite young and we were still in the era of bedtime being a kind of sacred thing, and one of the best times of the day with them when it was just like really cozy and snuggly and they would open up about whatever had happened to them that day. And it also so happened that that was at a stage of my life when I was professionally just like incredibly busy and it was intense. So honestly, even though I loved those bedtimes, it was hard for me sometimes to not have my cell phone with me and for me to be, sneaking glances at my cell phone to see what email had come in. And then I started doing this practice of memento mori because I was writing the book at this moment. And I would be there during bedtime and I would think to myself, you might not be here tomorrow and this beloved child might not be here tomorrow. Like we have no idea what life holds. Instead of that depressing me, all it did was make me have zero interest in my cell phone. It was no longer a temptation. It was just like, okay, I'm in this moment. And I think that that's basically what memento mori is doing writ large. It puts us right in the moment and fills you with gratitude for what you might have right now.
You have opened the door for me to talk about my NDE experience, my near-death experience. Memento mori was what happened to me at age 47. So I'm 65 now, or just about to turn 65, and so this is a while ago. And I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, and I went to the other side 9 times over 90 minutes after giving a speech, no less, on stage. Thankfully, I was when I went unconscious, I was signing books, so I was sitting down. And the experience I had was being in almost like a Swiss chalet on the second floor, 40-foot tall ceiling, and everything was just everything was slowed down. And everything was sensory. So I was just smelling there was this frangipani, this tropically scented oil, very thick oil going just sliding across the wood floor, and there was kaleidoscope of colors coming through the skylight, and there was a little bit of harp music, and then there were all these little birds that were surrounding me, and the birds kept saying to me, "Slow down. You can only see beauty and awe." First of all, I was able to understand bird talk, that's weird, and I was able to talk back to the birds, but slow down, you will only see beauty and awe if you slow down. And I was wearing 2 slippers, one said slow and the other said down, which weirdly enough we had a hotel in San Francisco called the Hotel Vitale that I'd built, and we literally had slow down slippers in the hotel. But I think there's a message there relative to what you're talking about, not just the memento mori, like, okay, that really shifted my life, and like, I could die any day. And how do I live my life? Death as an organizing principle for life. But I think the other thing that I'm hearing you say is this idea of when we are so wrapped up in our phones and in our to-do lists, we absolutely don't have time, or being on the treadmill, you don't really have time to see the beauty and the awe. You have to sort of slow down in order to experience it. And my sense is that both with Quiet and with Bittersweet, both of your books, there's an element of slowing down. There's an element of, in a very sped up society, knowing that slowing down is good for your nervous system. And so it sounds like you've incorporated it into your life as well.
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, I've incorporated it into my life. I mean, probably since leaving law and shifting to become a writer. But then especially in the last couple of years, I don't know if you want to talk about that as well.
Yes, please.
But yeah, no, so I'm 57 now, and I started noticing this. I'm not sure when, I want to say in the last couple of years, but I feel like it was really in the last couple of years that I've made this shift in my life. I call it now the second half of life. And it has nothing to do with health type stuff, because I feel, knock on wood, like just as healthy as I had before. But I started noticing that I'm just much less interested in questions of ambition and like doing things for the sake of doing them at a grand scale in some way is just not that interesting to me anymore. Or even the idea of having like a sped up schedule for one's day now seems to me incomprehensible as something I would ever want. Like it's certainly the case that there are some days where I have to have that kind of day. And I also feel like I'm incredibly lucky to be in this career where I'm able to structure my days more or less the way I want to. Whereas if I were still a lawyer, I wouldn't have that flexibility. So, huge acknowledgement of just like the incredible good fortune of being in this particular career, and having that flexibility. But suddenly, yeah, I can't imagine wanting to live any other way now. It's like, why would you not want to spend your days more quietly and with few and less crammed full of obligations of one kind or another? And I still love doing the work that I do. I think I'm probably going to be doing it for the rest of my life, however long I'm lucky to live. I don't think I'll probably ever retire. It's just that I have a different relationship to my work now.
My sense, though, is when you left both the law and then negotiating consulting firm you had, didn't that already happen back at around what age? Maybe 40-ish was around when you did that, all that happened? Or was that, or was it 33, as you said?
Yeah, it was earlier. I think it was around 33 or so. Yeah, I guess you could just see these things in stages. So yes, it totally happened then, because before that I had been a Wall Street corporate lawyer. So you know what that's like. I was working, if I left the firm at 8 p.m., I considered that an early day. There are many days where I was there till midnight or later. So yes, that was definitely a step in a completely different, you could say more quiet, more slow direction. But I would say I was still kind of like in a maximum ambition frame of mind for that time. I mean, yes and no. Like I did tell myself that writing was going to become my beloved hobby, and the goal I set myself was that I had to publish something by the time I was 75. And I made the goal like really far off because I loved writing so much. I didn't want it to become this pressure-filled thing. I wanted to just enjoy it for its own sake. So on the one hand, yeah, I was already kind of really stepping into that quieter frame of mind. But on the other hand, once I got the book deal for Quiet and started writing it in earnest, I just had the maximum dreams for it, I would say. And I was willing to do anything to make those dreams come true. I don't mean anything like morally. I just mean like any it didn't matter how hard I needed to work. Like so for example, like to do the TED Talk that I did for Quiet, that was a time in my life where I was absolutely flat out terrified of public speaking. So it's hard for me to describe to you exactly how emotionally taxing it was for me to do that, how much emotional pain it caused to be able to do it.
Is it hard to watch it now, or is it okay?
I don't know. I never like to watch my talks, so I don't know. I don't feel any extra not liking to watch that one compared to another one. I just don't really watch them in general. But I guess that's what I mean. Like I so much wanted to get that book out into the world, give it every single chance I possibly could, that I was willing to endure all those levels of emotional taxation to make it happen. And I think that's probably what's different now.
What kind of path are you carving through midlife? Our free Midlife Pathfinder quiz helps you discover which of 8 archetypes best describe your approach to this stage of life and what that means for your next chapter. It only takes a few minutes and your results may surprise you. Find out your archetype now. It's quick, it's fun, and it might help you see your journey in a whole new light. Take the Pathfinder quiz at meawisdom.com/quiz. What I'm hearing, Susan, is that in midlife, there's been some kind of fundamental shift. The knowledge that you have around needing quiet and needing and wanting to experience awe, beauty, emotions has been there for a while. But in the last couple of years, there's been a shift around ambition. What other shifts have you noticed in the last few years in midlife? At 57, you're solidly still in midlife. What else have you noticed? And why do you think that society is so crazily stupid around midlife? It's a life stage that we put the label of midlife crisis on it and just sort of assume that after that, it's just all downhill. But, the U curve of happiness research shows quite frankly that people get happier after a
Yeah.
low point around 45 to 52. And so what's been your experience of your own midlife?
I don't know, but my experience of it is that it's been quite amazing. And I want to say knock on wood, because I've had very few health challenges. And I do think that that's one reason that we associate midlife with something negative, that often it does come with, a lot of physical limitations, and nobody wants that. So I'm not sure what it is. Like, is it, that maybe that's 100% of the reason, that because we associate it with physical limitations, we also assume that everything else associated with it must also be negative, when in fact I have found the opposite to be true. As you're saying, like I just think it's a time of increasing calm, contentment, depth, self-knowledge, understanding of the world, like so many things.
I think it's also maybe because back to the memento mori, in midlife, you realize you have less years ahead of you maybe than you have behind you. And the idea that there's the Grim Reaper at the finish line, now you can start making the Grim Reaper out a little bit on the horizon. That's scary for people. I mean, no, we live in, especially in the US, we live in a society that is like has death amnesia. We don't wanna think about it. We don't wanna see it. Don't talk about it. And then there's these movements that come up like death cafes, or Michael Hebb, one of our MEA faculty members, started a program called Death Over Dinner. Over 1 million people globally started talking about death. But I think that's a piece of it as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And that too, I guess it's just kind of like the opposite of my bittersweet philosophy of life. Like I think that the more that you can make death out in the horizon, as opposed to it being an unthinkable thing, I think the happier the life you live, because then you really are infusing every moment with the knowledge of, okay, this moment will never come again. So what beauty is there right this minute? And we talked about this when you came to the Candlelight Chat about the work of Laura Carstensen at Stanford, who has found that older people tend to be happier. And she explored all kinds of reasons as to why that might be so. And at first she just assumed there was some kind of wisdom that mysteriously comes with old age, this kind of thing. But that turned out not to be the reason. And the real reason was just that older people have a sense of life's fragility. And the way she determined that was that she identified other groups who, for reasons of political situations or epidemics or whatever it was,
Cancer.
other group, younger people who also had a sense of life's fragility, and those people were happier also. I feel very afraid of the deaths of my beloveds, but I don't feel afraid of my own.
Susan, you've been 2 for 2. 2 for 2 in terms of your books, right? Is that scary? What's the next book? You've reframed introversion, you've reframed longing and beauty and emotion. What are you working on now, and is it another reframe?
I'm not sure, honestly. I've been very devoted to my Quiet Life Substack, so I feel like that's the main thing that I'm working on now, and really building up as I say, our congregation of people who are on this frequency. I find it to be just incredibly soul satisfying work. So that's what I'm really focused on. And at the same time, I have a whole bunch of computer files full of book proposal ideas and, half-written chapters and things like that. But I haven't decided yet which one I'm going with.
What's it feel like? Liz Gilbert teaches at MEA once a year, and, when her Eat, Pray, Love came out, I got to know her a little bit back then, and I've gotten to know her much more. The feeling of "Oh, no, do I have to hit another ball out of the ballpark," kind of thing. Does that ever mess with your mind or not really? Because you've had 2 really remarkably successful books that both critically successful, sort of in the academic world and, journalists who write about it, but also commercially successful. Or is that just something you don't think about?
I don't know. It's funny that you mention Liz Gilbert on this question, because the first TED Talk that I fell in love with, but long before I had given my own, and long before I ever dreamed that I would be a person giving a TED Talk, I fell in love with Liz Gilbert's talk on creativity, which is absolutely, I have goosebumps as I talk about it. It is magnificent. It's so, so, so good.
I was there in the second row. I was there in the second row watching her and talking about Tom Waits and talking about the genie and the genius. So for our listeners and viewers here, talk about what you loved about it and what it did for you, because I am so in love with that one too. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2009.
Liz's facility with language and just the poetry and rhythm of that talk was so incredibly beautiful. I think you just have to listen to it. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because that talk was basically about creativity, and specifically about how she felt in the wake of Eat, Pray, Love, with everybody asking her, well, of course you're never going to be able to pull that off again. And so what do you do now? And she was acknowledging the difficulty of that situation, but basically saying you just keep going, you just keep showing up, you keep serving the creative muse. So I remember I watched that talk while I was still writing Quiet, and I thought, well, that's a lucky problem to have. I hope I have that kind of problem. I never really thought I would, but I guess I do now have that problem in a way, which is why you just asked me that question. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, of course I think about those things, but I don't think about them too much, I guess I'd say. Yeah, but I do really feel like I only want to write a book when I feel like I have something that's very important to communicate. So I'm more focused on that. And then when that thing comes along, then I'm you know, full on devoted to that idea. And then I walk around the world for a few years just looking at the world through the lens of that thesis statement. So that's how I focus my mind.
When you think about what's next for yourself, it sounds like you have a bit of a tabula rasa. I mean, there's an element of like you give yourself space. You sort of see if the genie's ready to come through you. When you're writing, you're sort of observing the world from that point of view.
When I'm writing a book, I would say. Yeah, yeah. Because with the Substack, I'm always writing. Like I'm writing twice a week. It's just a different kind of writing because it's in small little bits, you know.
Did you ever get any great writing advice from anybody along the way that you incorporated into your writing practice? Or is there anything you could recommend to someone else who has aspired to be a writer? I mean, you at age 4, you knew you wanted to be a writer, and you were an English major in college, and then you opened this door in your mid-30s to the idea of writing. And what influences helped you to get to a place where you had the confidence that, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do?
I mean, the influences were just I had been such a reader all my life, and I just felt like the bond between the writers I read and me as the reader was such an incredibly sacred bond, like such a sacred form of connection between reader and writer. So I was just like really excited to be on the other side of that bond, be the writer this time and not only the reader. But in terms of advice for people who want to make that kind of move, I actually think one of the most important things that you can do is not put too much pressure on yourself. You know how I told you, I said, well, the goal is to publish something by the time I'm 75. I actually think that's incredibly important. And we were talking about Liz Gilbert. I noticed that she talked about this in her book, Big Magic on Creativity. I don't think the creative muse does very well when it's being told, you better earn a paycheck. You know, this has to get lots of critical acclaim or whatever. That doesn't work. So I think you need to do whatever you can to take the pressure off. So you were mentioning that I spent some years doing negotiation consulting. That was actually what I was doing to pay the bills once I realized that I wanted to devote myself to my writing hobby, and I needed some source of income. So I had spent all these years as a lawyer and I knew something about negotiation, so I opened up this little consultancy on the side where I would run workshops. And that's what that was for. But I think that's really important, is figuring out a way to do it that's as separate from everyday pressures as you possibly can make it. And I would also say to people, like, you might be in the stage of life where you're a corporate lawyer or equivalent. You know, maybe you're working 2 jobs to support your family, whatever it is. You might not have a lot of time, is what I'm saying. Can you set aside 5, 10, 15 minutes a day in your incredibly busy life just to have that space of writing for 15 minutes? That's it. And just see what happens and make it something that you really enjoy. Like I keep alluding to my writing in a cafe. It's because I really wanted to associate writing with conditions of intense pleasure. So for me, like writing in a sunny cafe window with the latte and all of that, I now associate writing with, like this is one of my favorite things I do during the day. So I would say just make those 15 minutes your special time and do them in a place that you find really beautiful, whether it's a little nook and cranny in your house or the backyard or a cafe or whatever works for you.
One last question, Susan, and that is, if a younger person came along and said, Susan, I'd love to have some coffee with you next week because we do know you like coffee. And I'd love to just tap into your wisdom about anything in life, personal life, professional life, writing life. And you were to take a piece of wisdom that you've learned along the way, put it into a bumper sticker, and there's an origin story for the bumper sticker. What would that be? What would be that piece of wisdom that has Susan Cain's wisdom fingerprints on them?
In Quiet, I have a manifesto with maybe 10 of those bumper stickers. And one of them is that everyone shines given the right lighting. and that for some people it's a Broadway stage, and for other people it's a lamplit desk or, a million other variations besides. And I really believe in that. And I think about that one a lot these days just because my sons happen to be teenagers. And I I was always kind of preaching this to them for a long time that they should I don't know, there's like a certain pathway that many young kids think they're supposed to follow in order to have a successful life. And I would say to them, that's fine if that's the pathway you really enjoy, but if you don't enjoy it, you won't enjoy your life and you probably won't be that good at it. So instead, look for the things you really love to do. And once you find those things, you will excel at them because you're going to love them. And they used to kind of resist that when they were younger. And then they started noticing at school just how much easier and more pleasurable it was to get good grades in the subjects they loved versus the ones they didn't like, what a pain in the neck it was. And so now they're very bought into that way of viewing the world. And I really do think that's one of those magic keys to a good life.
It's all about the right lighting. Okay. There's a term in occupational psychology, which is environmental mastery. It has nothing to do with the earth or ecology. It's as we get older, we are more wise about what habitats we can flourish in, whether that's in a romantic relationship or a community or a career. You understand, and for you, you understand when it comes to writing, your environmental mastery is the habitat of you love writing in a cafe, the right kind of environment in a cafe. I know for me, I write when I'm writing, it's being near an ocean if I can be, a body of water. So environmental mastery is really critical.
Absolutely. And it doesn't only apply to creative pursuits. I mean, like I always say to people who are in the corporate world, because we talk about introversion, extroversion, I always say, you should be thinking about your career choice and also a job interview for a particular company, let's say. You should be evaluating not only the the salary and the title and the classic kinds of things. You should be evaluating, is this a place where I'm going to be able to live in accordance with my own temperament, where I'm not always having to be stepping outside my comfort zone all day long. Bravo to being outside your comfort zone every so often in the service of your goals. That's important to do, but you shouldn't be outside your comfort zone constantly. So, and yet I don't think people think that way. They just think, okay, what's the most prestigious company? What's the best job? What's the most, which one will pay the most? Those kinds of things. And for day-to-day life, it's much more important to be in that state of fit.
Beautiful. Well, I've had a state of fit, not a fit, but a state of fit. I'm having a fit right now. No, Susan, thank you so much for joining us and helping us to see a different point of view from maybe the average person we bring on here who tends to be more of an extrovert and you know trying to sell something. Susan's not selling anything. She's just inviting us to just be who we are. As Oscar Wilde said long ago, "Be yourself. Everyone else is taken."
Yes, I love that quote.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Chip. And thank you for the work you do in the world too, which I absolutely love. Such a huge fan of what you do.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for having me.
Susan's somebody I really admire. She's so well respected in the academic world, even though she's not an academic, but in the thought leader world. And she also has a big following. I mean, her books have done so phenomenally well. So I was really appreciating what I heard from her, especially one of the terms she said that I'd never heard before that totally relates to me, reputational confusion. So that's my first lesson from her. Reputational confusion, do we have that in our lives? When do we have that? For me, it had to do with the fact that I present as an extrovert and I'm becoming more of an introvert as I get older. And so people sort of expect me to be the way I was in college or in graduate school or, as a hotelier, just like, being a bon vivant. And so reputational confusion is a really interesting concept and one I'm going to keep thinking about because For a lot of us around midlife, I think we get to this crossroads where who we've been has been the root, maybe the seedlings of where we're going, but where we're going is a different path than where we've been, and maybe a path less traveled. So keep that one in mind, reputational confusion, because I think it can actually be stunting for us if we feel like we have to live up to a past reputation of ourselves. Number two is I love that she brought up Doug Conant, who was the introverted CEO of Campbell Soup, and a really well-respected leader. The idea of a declare yourself exercise. Imagine that being on a team, a leadership team in a company, or maybe at a family dinner, and on a regular basis, you have a declare yourself exercise, an opportunity for each person to just say, you know what? This is who I truly am in life. We do this in some ways at MEA. We call it the third vault of communication. The first vault being the facts of our lives, often in our brain. The second vault being the stories of our life, often in our heart. And the third vault being the essence of who we are in this very moment, maybe the soul of us. So anything we can do in life that helps people to declare themselves or speak from the third vault creates the opportunity for a much deeper connection between people. And it's actually, I think, one of the reasons why there's some magic in our process, our MEA process that we do. And then finally, as a writer, talking to another writer, I really appreciated hearing Susan talk about how do you create the space for that genius to come through you? We talked a little bit about Liz Gilbert's 2009 TED Talk, which I hope we'll put it in the show notes. She said that for her, before she wrote her first book, she said she just wants to write a book before she's 75, which gave her a very wide berth to be able to just get into the joy of writing. And then she had a very busy life. She started writing as a hobby while she was in her second career, basically running a negotiation consulting firm. And so even if she just got 5 or 15 minutes to just tap into that joy, I get it. Like right now, I was working on a proposal. I'm actually working on a new book, which I'm not going to talk about yet, with a co-author, actually an MEA alum, somebody who was in a workshop with me, and we connected. And he had a book that he was been working on, and he said, like, Chip, I would love to co-author this with you. And I felt like, well, I can't join you on this journey. You've already been writing this, but I knew I had some ideas for him about how the book could be better. And now it looks like we may be writing a book together. And so he sent me the first draft of the proposal, and I got so into it this morning, the joy of just like the idea of what this book's going to be about. And so it was really hard for me to pull myself away from the writing, the joy of the writing, to come and do this interview right now. But that's what we need when we're writing. When we're doing something and getting into the flow of it, it's easy to go back to it. But it's when we have deadlines, and it's when we actually expect that, oh my God, my writing I have to make a living doing it, as opposed to doing it on the side. It's when we create too much discipline and not enough joy that any kind of practice, and especially a creative practice like writing, the love of it and maybe the quality of it can actually suffer. So if you have an aspiration to be a writer, figure out how to do it on the margins. Do it enough to have joy in it, and then see where it takes you. Well, I hope that this took you on a nice journey today. We look forward to seeing you next week on the Midlife Chrysalis.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.